Hello, I'm Peter Odendaal, and this is my project for the Climate Adaptation Studio of Q3 2020. In this project, we identified various vulnerabilities within our smaller groups that affect and impact the community of Malusi. My goal for this project is to address pressing vulnerabilities and needs for the inhabitants of Malusi. This is of paramount importance specifically for a poverty-stricken informal neighborhood because people in poverty are less resilient and more vulnerable to the effects of climate change. Guidelines set out by the COPC will be followed, added to and approved upon, which will cause an improved clinic and research center as well as a community center focused on education. The program will seek to follow various climate adaptation principles. The site is found within Pretoria, specifically to the west, neighbouring on Boysons and Kirkney. Summer rain bring hail and thunderstorms with between 600 and 700 millimeters of rainfall a year, and this will become important later on. Malusi is found in the Savannah Central Bushveld Vegetation Unit, verging on 6, 8, 9, and 10. This will give us an indication of the indigenous vegetation and geology of the area. Malusi was founded in 2009 and experienced rapid growth since then. The population mostly lives in poverty, and the 25,000 people that live here usually do not have basic services. Climate change will have various impacts on South Africa. Some of the more serious consequences is the variability of rainfall expected over the next 100 years, with the CSIR showing a reduction into the coming decade. This will impact society drastically, but more so people who do not have the means to adapt to such change. From our vulnerability mapping, we identified 3 drivers that have a significant impact on health within Malusi, this being food, shelter, and services, or rather the lack thereof. My focus here started identifying water as a leverage point. 3 role players are then associated with the development, and they all have separate needs. Community members are the most vulnerable, and their needs are basic: food, services, and shelter. The client has its phasing needs, where phase 1 is construction of the clinic container, phase 2 is to include education and skills development in cooking and nutrition, and phase 3 will focus on offering accredited training for current school teachers, as well as developing an interactive learning site. Finally, the doctors and the community healthcare workers' needs somewhat align with that of the COPC. Added to this is their own needs, such as improved working conditions. My theoretical approach is that of the triple bottom line, with the improvement of the trinity of social, economic, and ecological factors being the goal, which in turn will bring advancement for the entire neighborhood. Initial concept sketches did not remain at all as the final design turned out, but some elements remained important: the progression from public to private space and various elements drawn that started developing various ideas. My concept approach is that of symbiosis, specifically the interaction between different nodes that improve all parties involved. This is linked closely to the idea of regenerative design, where the goal is not merely to use minimum amount of resources and net zero impacts on the environment, but rather using the site and building to reverse damage and create a net positive impact on the environment. To further this idea, the triple bottom line is used in conjunction with the idea of symbiosis to form programs that work together for the betterment of the different factors within the triple bottom line. In this case, the program will consist of a clinic and research center and further a community center that focuses on education predominantly for adults. I believe the research center can be geared for finding solutions to problems within Malusi and further sharing the knowledge with the community. In simple terms, the sharing of relevant knowledge that can improve lifestyle. Continuing on the concept, the site will have a symbiotic relationship with the development to increase the adaptive capacity of the site and further the community, making them more resilient and more robust to change. The original clinic site was chosen to further develop, firstly because it has a certain familiarity within the community already, secondly it's spaced close to the main road into Malusi which makes it accessible, and finally there is sufficient open space to develop. The site sits at the foot of a hill on the northern aspect with the wind blowing from the north. The site is fairly exposed except for the western side, which has some mature trees. Main access for vehicles is from the western side. Drainage lines flows north-northeast off the site, and there are footpaths visible in the veld to the north, which indicates some pedestrian patterns and movement. Massing development started as a massive structure that would house all functions under one roof. This soon changed to smaller structures. It was also important that the clinic sit on the western side of the development because the mature trees would give it some privacy. The community centers then stepped forward against the edge to allow for a more public interface. Principles are divided into electrical, responding to context, and site response. Most of these ideas are good practice. Orientation to the north, shading the west side, designing for sun angles, and cross ventilation. Double glazing and insulation become important for energy efficiency. Overlaps exist where, for example, cross ventilation is context response but improves electrical efficiency. The site itself can further respond by aiding with improvement of microclimate, increased softscaping, equally cut and fill, and finally the harvesting of water, my focus. One of the precedents I looked at was the Willow School. One of the main factors that I took away from this building is the fact that it used landscape and building to become an educational tool for its learners. Two systems for water harvesting will be introduced, namely rainwater harvesting and greywater harvesting. The harvested water will be filtered through an artificial wetland with the option of introducing a UV filter to make it potable. This will then be used for irrigation of landscapes, supplementing aquaponic systems, and flushing. Initial concept sketches of the artificial wetland started exploring the process. The water would need to be taken through soils, plants, pebbles, coarse gravel, and sand to be filtered. Calculations were done to see how much water can be harvested through rain and from roofs per annum. Even with a below average rainfall of 600 millimeters, there would be 445,000 liters that can be harvested in a year. Wetland size will be determined by using a number between worst case and average rainfall in a day. I'm, for instance, not worried about flooding. Overflow will be safe and away from the buildings. The site had to be open to the street edge and connect across the street to attach to the existing pedestrian movement paths. Large open space areas are also important for the design. Here are some initial design proposals. Please refer to the addendum for some additional process work. The clinic and the research center sit to the western side of the development and again step back from the edge to create more privacy. Educational 1 becomes a large hall practical room on the street edge. This will be where most teaching will happen, but it's also a multifunctional space which can house various programs and functions. Educational 2 is to the east of the development, and this is the study IT hall where most of the learning will happen. This gives the community access to the internet and resources. Out of this building is a typological garden and plantation area, together with a greenhouse, all used for teaching how to grow trees, vegetables, fruits, etc. The artificial wetland is in the middle of the development, and from this a catchment water feature stretches to the lowest point of the site in the northeast corner. The clinic and research center uses spill-out space to create comfortable waiting areas both inside and outside. Various areas are created as open space and planted. Studies done by Hall and Knuth have shown that such spaces reduce stress, decrease depression, enhance memory retention, and provide greater happiness. This is how the environment can improve social aspects. The artificial wetland and catchment work from the bottom left to the top right, going with the slope of the site. The catchment area is shaded as much as possible to avoid loss of water through evaporation. Filtered water can be pumped directly to storage if need be. The wetland will live off rain events and further be supplemented by grey water throughout the year. It's important to note for this render that I did not add photovoltaic panels on the roofs, and forgive me for not adding more of the Malusi context around the site. By focusing on water harvesting, the community will have a buffer in times of scarcity. Further, the co-benefit of food production allows for supplementation of diets within the community. The clinic and research center will then work in a symbiotic relationship with the community center to allow for people to adapt, mitigate, and become more resilient to climate change and hopefully other challenges that might arise. The effect of the theoretical approach is positive. The only place where I feel the development lacks is that it does not directly impact the economy for the inhabitants of Malusi in a profound way. It only indirectly affects economic factors for the clients by the structures on site being more effective in terms of electricity and water consumption. Materials will then be sourced locally and labor-intensive construction can be employed to have more people working on the site. The softscaping will have various hardy indigenous species that contribute to the biodiversity of the site and are well adapted to this climate and vegetation unit. Although the quote is somewhat cliche, I do believe the message is quite clear. All of us in the profession know of and have heard of climate change, but sometimes I think we do not see the threat that it can be. By making development regenerative, adaptive, robust, and resilient, it creates a buffer for society. This will be a constant problem and challenge for the architectural profession throughout our lives.